Okey-doke. Directed technological change. And we're going to go straight to the foundations of the aggregate DTC model. So this is big time math coming up. Okay, I guess there's nothing that hard, but it takes a long time. Okay, there's a lot to get through to get to the end results. Okay, but some of the basic results are really straightforward, and that's what I want you to really get your heads around. The understanding of how to get there, and then to understand why the results are as they are is absolutely crucial. Okay. Okay, so what have we got in this model? We've got a bunch of different firms, haven't we? And they are, if we remember the general model of endogenous technological change, we have these sort of parallel firms with slightly different products. Okay. And a given firm, I, is competing with all the other firms to sell its stuff. And if it produces more of its particular good, yi, that is going to push the price of that good, pi, down. Okay. So, in perfect competition, of course, pi is exogenous to firm I because it's just the price of the overall good on the market. But here, you have market power. The more you produce, the lower the price you get for it, which tends to mean that firms hold production down to try to get higher prices. That's market power, right? And we're just told here, we can do a lot of math to get this result, but we're just told that dpi dyi times yi over pi is equal to minus 1 minus eta. So it's negative, eta is between 0 and 1, yeah, so this is negative because price, when y goes up, p goes down, yeah. Now then, what's the link to this, between this and marginal revenue? Well, what's marginal revenue? Marginal revenue is dpi yi by dy, isn't it? How much does revenue change when production goes up? And that is dpi by dy times yi plus dy dy times pi, which is just pi. So if you look at this and compare to this, what can we see? If we take a pi outside of this, we end up with pi times dpi dy yi over pi, which is minus 1 plus eta plus 1. So marginal revenue is eta pi. Okay. So we're just told that to save you a bunch of extra math. Okay. And I'll just take a pause there. Okay, so that was the result, which I just said we assumed, and then we get marginal revenue is eta pi, which actually turns out to be just eta, because in a symmetric equilibrium, all the p's are the same, and we normalize them to 1. Okay, so then the next step is to actually start looking at this firm's problem. So what is this firm's problem? The problem is, as usual, to maximize revenue minus costs, subject to the restrictions. So what's revenue? Revenue is pi, which is a function of yi, times yi. And we know that yi is ali li to the epsilon plus a ri to the epsilon 1 over epsilon. Okay. So I need to sort this out. Okay. So we've got L, the Lagrangian. L is pi of yi times yi, where actually yi is this, right? So that's revenue. Minus costs. So what are costs? So what are the inputs? The firm is paying for research labor, ZLI and ZRI. Research on making labor more productive, research on making the resource more productive. So it's minus the cost of research labor times the quantities. Okay. What else is the firm paying for? It's paying for the actual labor and the actual resource. WL, LI, WR, RI. Price times quantity of each of those inputs. So far so good. But what is YI? YI depends on ALI and ARI. But ALI and ARI depend on ZLI and ZRI. So we've got these restrictions to take account of. So what are the restrictions? The restrictions are that ALI is equal to some function which we call f subscript L times ZLI to the phi. Okay, that's one restriction. So this is saying that the firm's knowledge in this period, which we're leaving out the time subscripts, but there's a t's everywhere here if you like. And the firm's labor productivity in this period is some function of existing knowledge in the economy, which we're kind of ignoring for now, times how much the firm invests in labor productivity raised to the phi. Okay. So the firm is, these periods are long, and coming into the next period, the firm has to kind of, okay, we have to invest to get productive labor. And if we turn this into a part of the Lagrangian, we can say that A Li minus this equals naught, and then we can write lambda Li times this as part of the Lagrangian, right? And then we have a similar one for the resource input. Okay. So this is the firm's Lagrangian. And a necessary condition for an internal optimum is that all the first order conditions on this must be satisfied. Okay, so let's go on to the first order conditions. Okay, so we're going to start by taking the first order condition in Li. And then basically we're going to use symmetry to get all the other first order conditions, pretty much. So what's the first order condition in Li? We've got a minus WL here, haven't we? What else have we got? We've got that dpi times yi by the Li is dpi yi by dy times dy by the Li, right? The dpi yi by dy is marginal revenue, which is just eta. So we get eta dpi yi by dy is eta times dy by the Li. What is dy by the Li? Yi is this. So when we differentiate with respect to Li, we first go to the outside. and we say, well, it's 1 over epsilon times the square brackets to the 1 over epsilon minus 1. Okay, that's the outside. Then we go inside and we say epsilon times ALI, Li to the epsilon over Li. Epsilon ALI, Li to the epsilon over Li. So this is kind of differentiating like an economist, isn't it? We're taking the original expression and then putting this underneath, instead of putting a minus 1, ALI to the epsilon, Li to the epsilon minus 1. We could have done. Okay. So let's set about simplifying this a bit. Okay. The first thing we can do is wipe out those. Okay, and then we can also say minus WL equals 0. And now we're going to simplify. So first we cancel those epsilons that just cancel each other out. And then we say, we take the WL over and say equals WL. Then we take this Li up here and say that. Then we say 1 over epsilon minus 1 is the same thing as one minus epsilon over epsilon. Okay. Not that we actually need to do that at this point, but whatever. Yeah. So that's the first order condition with respect to Li. What about the first order condition with respect to Ri? Well, you can go through everything if you want, or if you really can see what's going on, you can just say, oh, there's symmetry here, and we can write either 1 minus epsilon over epsilon ARI Ri to the epsilon equals WR Ri. Okay. Then when we take those two together, we get that ALI Li over ARI Ri all to the epsilon equals WL Li over WR Ri. So that's our first important result. Okay, I'm going to take a quick breather. Okay, so next we're going to take the first order conditions in ALI and ARI. And hang on. Yeah. Sorry. Yep. ALI and ARI. And then if we look at this carefully, we're going to see that we can use symmetry again. Because if we look at here, we can just sort of switch these. It's the same thing, right? Nothing really happens when we switch these around. And here we had minus WL Li minus WR Ri. Here we have minus lambda L Li ALI minus lambda Ri ARI. So these lambdas are taking the places of the W. And when we do the math, and of course you're very welcome to go through it, if you don't sort of trust the symmetry, you're going to end up with ALI Li over ARI Ri all to the epsilon. That's coming from this is equal to, equivalent to this with the prices. Now we have lambda Li ALI over lambda RI, ARI. So that's our second important result. And I'm going to take another quick breather. Okay, so we've got these two crucial results. And the third thing we need to do is take the first order conditions in the Z's. And then we're done. Okay. And here we can't quite use the symmetry. Well, we can't use the symmetry in the same way at all. There's no Z's in this yi expression, so that's cool. So we can ignore that. So what do we have? We have that dl by dzli, for instance, equals minus wz coming from there this was zli, wasn't it? Yeah. Minus minus, so plus lambda li fl phi blah blah blah. Okay, but so plus lambda li times this times phi over zli times something over zli. Okay. But what's this something? Remember how the Lagrangian works. This is just ALI. Okay. Equals naught. So again, we can do a bit of rearranging and say WZ equals that, and then we can take the ZLI up and we can say WZ ZLI equals that one. Okay, this is looking pretty awesome. Because now again we're going to use symmetry and we're going to say that WZ ZRI is lambda RI phi ARI. So then when we divide these two by each other, we get that ZLI over ZRI is equal to lambda Li ALI over lambda RI ARI. And that's our third crucial result. And I'm going to take another. Okay, so I'm just going to rearrange on the board now and wipe a bunch of stuff off and shift this up to there. Okay, so these are our three key results from the first order conditions. So typically with Lagrangians we want to get rid of the multipliers, don't we? So let's just do that and say ZLI over ZRI equals that, which is equal to that. ALI, LI over ARI, RI. So the eta, epsilon, sorry. But wait, this is just that. So we've now got a much more compact kind of form of the result. What's this saying? This is saying that the firm's investment in labor productivity compared to its investment in resource productivity is equal to the shares of what the firm spends on labor compared to what it spends on the resource. So if it spends a lot more on labor, it's going to invest a lot more into efficient labor inputs. Okay, so how does this then pan out? That was based on the individual firm. How does this pan out in the aggregate? Okay. Let's have a look at that. So, first thing is, if the firms are all symmetric, then we can make this kind of the representative firm, if you like. And we can say big ZL without the i's over big ZR is equal to AL L over AR R. So the epsilon equals WL L over WR R. Okay. And then let me just pause. Okay. So let's imagine then that we know the AL and the AR, and we know L and R, the given quantities of labor and the resource. Then we would know the factor shares and we would know the relative investments. But what if instead we know the price of the resource compared to the price of labor? Then we're not so happy with this expression, right? So ideally we want to change this, get rid of the L and R here and get WLs and WRs. And we kind of should be able to do that using this. So to get rid of the L and R, what we can do is multiply this by WLL over WRR to the minus epsilon, right? And then what we end up with is AL over WL divided by AR over WR to the epsilon. We multiplied this by this to the minus epsilon. And if we multiply this by this to the minus epsilon, we end up with WLL over WRR to the 1 minus epsilon. Okay? So if that holds, this must also hold, because we multiplied both sides by this to the minus epsilon. Then, if we raise both sides to the power of 1 over 1 minus epsilon, we get epsilon over 1 minus epsilon and 1, which is what we started with. So then we can say, we've got an alternative expression in terms of relative prices and knowledge stocks instead of relative quantities and knowledge stocks. Okay. Another quick breather. Okay. So this is going to be our key equation. So I'm going to wipe the rest of these equations and we're just going to use this one, okay? Okay, so let's just have a quick look at this. Okay, what is this? So remember we said before, the firm invests in accordance to the factor shares. If it's spending a lot on labor, it'll invest a lot on labor productivity. But the factor shares are linked to the knowledge stocks and the prices. Let's assume that epsilon is positive. Okay. So this, don't worry. So this is positive. Okay. So then imagine that labor productivity goes up, then the factor share of labor goes up and investment in labor goes up. What happens when investment in labor goes up? The productivity goes up even more. The factor share goes up, investment goes up even more. Okay. So what's going on here? When epsilon is positive, the inputs are good substitutes. They're strongly substitutable. And it means that if one of them gets more productive, you use more, you love it, you use lots more, and it takes a bigger share of your inputs. If epsilon instead is negative, then when AL goes up, productivity of labor goes up, this goes down, so the share of labour actually goes down. So here they are poor substitutes. And when they're poorly substitutable, if you've got a lot of one but not much of the other, you're desperate for more of the one that you haven't got much of, and the one you've got lots of, its price goes down very steeply. So when the price goes down very steeply, its share goes down, even though its productivity went up. You spend less money on that input when it gets more productive, because you've got like an abundance of it, and it's the other one you're desperate to get a hold of. So then, when productivity goes up, share goes down, investment in productivity goes down, productivity tends to go down again. So here you've got an inherent stability in the system, whereas here you've got an inherent instability. And we're going to have a look at that now in a particular case, in a kind of extreme case. Because we're going to assume that there's a lot of power in the directed technological change mechanism. Because we're going to assume that new knowledge augmenting labour is a function only of investment and existing knowledge augmenting labour, and has nothing to do with other knowledge. Okay, so the knowledge is kind of in drain pipes, as the Swedes would say. And the same is true for new knowledge augmenting the resource. Okay. So this is what I call independent knowledge stocks. They grow independently of each other. So then we can divide one through the other, obviously, and we end up with ALT over ART is, let's do it. I'll stop the video and just do it off. Okay, so we end up with this. So what does this show? It shows that if we have a new ratio of this, let me think. Okay, I'm actually going to manipulate this a bit more, and I'm going to take these over. Okay, I'm going to do it off camera. Okay, so I've shifted the ALT minus 1 and ART minus 1 over, and I played around with these as well. By the way, I had an L instead of an R somewhere. It was wrong. So this is sort of a growth rate, if you like, or a kind of growth rate in AL, and this is a sort of growth rate in AR. So the relative speed of growth of AL compared to AR could be anything if we get the right factor shares. So as long, if the factor share, if we want AL to grow 10 times faster than AR, we just need to make the factor share like 10 to the 1 over 5, I guess, times bigger for L than R, right? And then we'll get there. So we can have any relative growth rate here for any, as long as we can choose the factor share. Then what we want to do is think about balanced growth. Let's assume that WL over WR is changing at some constant rate. And we want balanced growth. For balanced growth, then, we want ZL over ZR to be constant, otherwise it's never going to be balanced. These relative investments and the relative factor shares have to be staying the same, otherwise you're going to end up out of balance over time. So if this is changing at a certain rate, then this has to change at the same rate. But we've just said we can achieve any relative rate of change with the right factor shares. So it's basically showing that given these knowledge production functions with the independent knowledge stocks, for any constant rate of change of relative prices, we can find a balanced growth path. Okay. But will that balanced growth path be stable? Okay. And this is where these epsilons come in. Okay. So we could be on a balanced growth path, but the slightest disturbance will mean we head off to a corner. And that will be the case if epsilon is positive. We have these inputs that are good substitutes. They're strongly substitutable. Generally, you're going to want to put all your eggs in one basket. Okay, use just one of the inputs, put all your investment into improving the productivity of that input, rather than spreading across two inputs. If you're at the point where you're indifferent between the two inputs, if anything shifts you to one or the other, you're going to head more and more in that direction and end up heading towards the corner. If you're on the balanced growth path and AL goes up a bit, this goes up, the share of L goes up, ZL goes up, this goes up more, the share of L goes up more, and so on, and you end up with all your L takes over completely and R is irrelevant. But if epsilon is negative and your inputs are poor substitutes, then you have stability. So this is the one picture with epsilon positive, and this is the picture for epsilon negative. Okay. And in this case, we basically can say that, look, we have a BGP with a stable balanced growth path with constant factor shares, even though our original production function was CES with epsilon negative, i.e. poorly substitutable inputs. So in the short run, if, for instance, the price of R drops compared to the price of labor goes up, the inputs are poorly substitutable, the share of labor will go up. But then firms will invest in labor augmenting knowledge and not invest in resource augmenting knowledge, and the increase in AL will compensate for the increased price of L, and the share will come back down again. And of course, in the long run, if that's the case, if it's a shock, in the long run, if it's just a steady increase in the price of labor compared to the price of the resource, we'll have a steady increase in AL compared to AR, and we'll have balance in this model. So effectively, it's as if the aggregate production function is, let's put a capital Y there, is AL, L to the 1 minus alpha, R to the alpha. It's as if we got a Cobb-Douglas here in the long run, because the shares seem to stay the same. So the point is that this model provides a potential explanation for why we tend to see fixed factor shares in the long run, even though when we think about the micro level, we would expect them not to be fixed. I know that is super tough, but yeah. Try to go through this and think through it. The key is to understand the overall intuition. Okay. That's what I really want you to take home from this, and that's what we'll talk about in the lecture. So I'm going to stop there.